Welcome to episode 266 of Sports Geek. On this week's episode, I discuss cricket, athletics and football with sports business vet Luke Bould.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who can help you with that digital rate card, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, my name is Sean Callanan, and you can find me in all good places on the internet. Ideally, it's at sportsgeekhq.com. If you want to send me a message, you can do so via email if you want to use that old school method, sean@sportsgeekhq.com. And you can find me on the internet on most platforms as at Sean Callanan or at SportsGeek. Remember, at SportsGeekHQ, you can find this podcast as well as our Q&A podcast that comes out on Fridays where I answer your questions. You can send your question in by going to sportsgeekhq.com/questions. You can also sign up for our newsletter, Sports Geek News, that comes out every week, and it shares the links and the articles that I read throughout the week. And the ones that get the most clicks on my socials end up in that article. So thank you for clicking on the links because it helps curate that newsletter. But if you want a little bit of mix of sports, technology, marketing, digital, and a little bit of quirkiness, we try to offer that in Sports Geek News every week. And you can support these efforts of creating sports business content through our Patreon campaign. If you listen to this podcast, if you have for a long time, if you're listening to the 250-something episode, thank you very much. But if you're tuning in for the first time, thank you very much. You can support these efforts by going to our Patreon page, sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. You can do it at a personal level, $4 a month, for effectively 4 podcasts and a couple of different extras with the Sports Geek Q&A series and the newsletter. But if you are a brand that wants to connect with sports teams and leagues and executives from around the world, you can do so as a silver or gold supporter of Sports Geek in our Patreon campaign. So go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. My guest today is a good mate of mine, Luke Bould. He's just wrapped up a gig at the FFA, Football Federation Australia, and has had a long career in the world of sports business. We discuss that and also what he has planned for the future. So here's my chat with Luke Bould. Very happy to be here in a sunny Melbourne morning. After heading to the tennis last night, I was lucky enough to go to the tennis last night. I'm here with my guest, Luke Bould. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Great to be here. Good morning. Amazing night of tennis last night. Such a great event, isn't it?
Yeah, so for context, recording this the night after the Millman Federer 5-setter. So when this does get published, you can go back and see what a game that was. I guess this podcast I do say it a lot, dancing around trying to figure out where time to get this done. We've known each other for a while now.
We have.
Before we dive into what you're currently doing and what you have been doing, I like finding out, how did you get your start in the world of sports business?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I often talk about the fact that I'm a geologist.
A geologist?
And that was, my first degree or my first job was in geology. Suffice to say, I decided that sort of spending half a year in the middle of nowhere was probably not what I wanted to do. So I made the smart decision of getting out of mining just before the mining boom.
Okay.
And look, I'd always had a great passion for sport. Growing up, in Australia, it's hard not to. And
what were your sports of choice growing up?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Melbourne, so I think it's hard to grow up in Melbourne and not have a connection to AFL.
Yep.
So that was certainly a sport of passion. Basketball, I played a lot of basketball. 6'5", you get sucked onto the court pretty quickly. So I have a great passion for basketball. Football, world football, has always been a passion. I was never any good at it. But to be brutally frank, I'll watch anything.
Yep.
I'm pretty excited about Super Bowl because I'm a 49ers fan.
Okay.
And we're due. So, if there's a sport, I'll be watching it. So it was a natural place, I think, for me to try and get to.
So rocks weren't your thing. And so you decided you want to get into, I guess, that side. Did you initially jump into sport, or was there another industry you played around in?
Yeah, there was. I actually sort of got into marketing, and I started working at a company called Polygram, which no longer exists in its form. But Polygram was a recording or a record label. I actually owned a number of record labels. Mercury and London Records were the two that I worked with in the UK, and also worked with Polygram Film Entertainment, which at the time, had a whole range of different products, but probably Trainspotting was the breakout movie of the time I worked there, which does two things. It ages me terribly, but it also lets you get a bit of an understanding of how I started in sports and entertainment.
But it is, I mean, that's the thing. It's music of another time.
Yeah,
right.
That's right.
Vinyl and cassettes and
exactly right.
tours, and like that was the bread and butter.
Yep.
And so that was the world you started in.
Yeah, and in a very different time. I mean, I was in the UK in the late 90s. It was a fantastic time culturally in the UK. A lot of change with the Blair government, and Cool Britannia was rolling out. But it was also the end of the old days of CDs and the traditional way of promoting and marketing music and
that
movies.
digital disruption when we're LimeWire and all of those, the downloading and people stealing, the piracy that music faced really early on.
That's exactly right. So, music in many respects was the first of the entertainment businesses to really go through that transition and that disruption, which is, everyone's favourite word.
Yep.
And sport, interestingly, is now going through it.
Yeah.
Sport has probably been a little bit lucky in that it's been late to the party, but we might talk a bit later about how prepared sport is for the disruption that, it's not coming, it's now upon us.
Yeah. And so what was your first sports gig coming out of the music world?
Yeah, so I came back to Australia in 99 late 98, at the heady time of the Sydney Olympics being upon us. And I ended up working for an advertising agency that had started its own sort of sports consultancy. Okay. So that was great because I had the opportunity to work, did a lot of work with the Melbourne Tigers in the NBL as they were. We did a lot of work with a number of the AFL clubs. We worked with cricket, we worked with Tennis Australia on different projects. So that was a great opportunity for me to get a breadth of clients and a breadth of understanding of the sports industry, but also to build a network and start to meet people and that became in very handy, or has come in very handy in the 20 odd years since. And
so from a sport point of view, sort of getting a taste of the different pieces, and then you jumped into actually working for a sport and for an org. What was that like compared to the agency land where you get a bit of a taste of everything?
Yeah, my first full-time national sporting organisation role was with Athletics Australia. Again, that was in 05, 06 or around that period. So, you've still got that afterglow of the Olympics, but coming into a Melbourne Commonwealth Games. With some tremendous, Australian athletes at the time. I really enjoyed it. It was challenging. I mean, one thing you learn being in an Olympic sport like athletics is you learn to do a lot with a little. Yeah. Because you just don't have the resources that many of the bigger sports or all of the bigger sports have. So I really enjoyed it. It was athletics is a sport that I was an okay discus thrower and shot putter at school, so I had a kind of affinity. Probably my greatest sporting moment is winning the APS shot put at Olympic Park in Melbourne. I just thought I'd drop that into the conversation.
That's all right.
Sean.
You're always happy to share awards that you've won.
That's exactly
even
right.
Even if they were at like 12.
Yeah, correct.
13.
Thank you. Thanks for rubbing that in. That's fantastic.
So the challenge, I guess, for the Athletics Australia and a lot of Olympic sports, like we're coming into Olympic year now, this year, 2020, is that high visibility but really short window. You don't have the length of conversation or eyeballs that you do in the other sports. How was that as a challenge, like for Athletics
really challenging?
Australia?
Yeah, really challenging. I mean, you're absolutely right. And of course, the landmark moments, the Commonwealth Games, the Olympic Games, you don't actually own the team. Yeah. So your athletes in inverted commas are running around in someone else's uniform. Yep. Generally a competitor brand. It just happened to be that way. And you don't have access to them during that period. Yeah.
So it's the opposite of every other sport.
Correct. That's exactly right. And that is incredibly challenging. But I think, the big challenge for beyond that and the commercialisation is how the sports prepare leading into an Olympic period to make sure they make the most of the participation surge that they hope is going to come. And of course, you don't have to hope.
Yeah.
You need to actually be prepared, get your marketing messaging right, because there are no constraints on marketing your sport during Olympic Games other than budget. So that for me has always been something that I took out of my time at athletics, and particularly again coming into a home Commonwealth Games. We did a lot of thinking, a lot of work on trying to make sure that athletics really benefited. One of the challenges at the time, and thankfully athletics has now moved on from this, but athletics didn't own or control its junior development program at the time. So Little Athletics was a separate entity.
Okay.
And at different times, the two have probably not got along, would be the right way of putting it. But thankfully, the sport's moved beyond that now, and that's now united. So that makes things a lot easier for athletics going forward.
It does help connect. As long as we're sharing awards, I did win an award at Little Aths down in Pakenham.
Good on
I think
you.
I was about 6 at the stage. I've still got the little trophy at home. So
I love that.
Now we don't want to have a measuring competition here, but we'll keep moving on. So after athletics,
No, before we move on, I want to know what you won it for. And I'm sure the listeners do too.
Oh, no. I was one of those ones who was an encouragement award.
Oh, excellent.
And unfortunately, I thought I was up for the yearly one, but Cameron Fleming, God bless his heart, he won because he put in much more effort than me, obviously. So the encouragement award is not one that is high on the list, but happy that it's still in the trophy cabinet at home.
I think you should be proud.
Definitely. So after athletics, sort of moving from that, the Olympic Commonwealth Games environment. What was your next stop?
Yeah, next stop was Cricket Australia, at a really interesting time in the development of the game. I started at CA in 2007. Interestingly, just after Australia had beaten England 5-0 in an Ashes series, and cricket was on at a period where it was growing rapidly, but doing a lot of navel gazing and really trying to understand what its future looked like, because cricket at the time was really suffering from the concept of being stale, male and pale. Aging fan base, very masculine, and really not representative of a diversifying and Australian population. So I had a great privilege of being involved in cricket when a couple of really critical things happened. The first was the decision to invest in the Big Bash and actually start the Big Bash 2 years earlier. And the Big Bash was Cricket Australia's and Australian cricket's, I guess, determination to make sure they created a product that was relevant to young fans. And I think what's interesting about the Big Bash is they really made a concerted effort to make sure it was different. So this wasn't just going to be 2020 but served up like one-day cricket or like Test cricket. It was going to be an entertainment product that just happened to take place around a cricket match. And I think the Big Bash, was certainly the first of the Australian sports that went all in on that. But, we've been talking about the tennis already in this discussion. I mean, the Australian Open now is really a festival that just happens to have a tennis tournament going on in the middle.
I think I was there with my uncle last night, and he goes, it's like a tennis nightclub. And it was like, we were lining up in a bar, getting a beer, and it's like, where's the screen? Like there was it's an entertainment precinct as much as it's a sporting event.
Absolutely. And I think that's really insightful for sports, for sports going forward. And some sports have got it right and others haven't. And we'll probably come back to that. The second thing that Cricket Australia did during my time was nationalise its development programs. So it's gateway products for participation. So, in the past, every state had their own version of Kanga cricket or, Oz cricket or whatever it was. We nationalised that. We created a single brand, which at the time was Into Cricket. It was sponsored by Milo. And that really had a massive impact on, first of all, the quality of experience that the participants had. And then really the ability to get out and grow participation. And, Cricket Australia have had a lot of publicity about, where their participant numbers are, but there's clearly been growth. And a lot of that started off the back of that. The third thing that happened that I was lucky enough to be involved in was really a restructure of the governance model of Australian cricket. And my role was more in the commercial side and taking a model that was 100 years old, or the best part of 100 years old and outdated, and nationalising the commercial model of Australian cricket. And that, my last year at CA in 2013, 2014, I think I spent more time on planes than anyone else, than, than a Qantas pilot, because, there was myself and a couple of my colleagues literally going around on a weekly basis and negotiating to buy commercial rights back and underwrite different commercial rights from different states. And that, again, has put, wasn't the only person involved, but has
Yep.
put cricket in a really strong position, and Australian cricket's gone from strength to strength.
Because it was in that space where it was fractured and all the states were owning their own things. They were doing their own deals, and it's
Correct.
made it hard for brands coming into the market and saying, we want to be talking to the Australian public in summer. Cricket has been the custodian of summer for many, many years. How do we do that? And they were effectively having to have 5 different conversations.
That's exactly right. And look, I remember when I started CUB at the time, VB, the beer brand.
Yeah, major brewery here in Australia.
Correct. That's exactly right. It was and I think it still is the biggest consumed beer in Australia. We're the sponsor of Australian cricket. But when we went to the first test played at the Gabba in Brisbane, well, Forex, which is their direct competitor and their major competitor, was the sponsor of Queensland cricket. So not only could you not get a VB in the stadium, but all the signage was Forex. So, clearly that is not a great way to run a program, and it undermined the value that the sport as a whole was getting out of the beer category, and clearly it was happening in other categories. So that nationalisation, which was difficult because it's always difficult to get someone who owns something to give it up.
Yep.
That has proven to be a masterstroke for cricket because their revenues have gone up.
Yep.
And the states have gone from being, they still have their commercial businesses, but they've been able to focus more of their resource on participation, on getting more kids to play, on running better competitions, and that ultimately is their core business.
I mean, and that's part of the health of the sport. Like, we look back at the heyday of cricket, and England was always looking at the Sheffield Shield being strong.
Yes.
Right, but the Sheffield Shield was only strong because there was players playing and pushing for those positions, and that starts at the very base, getting more kids playing cricket, more kids staying and playing cricket. That's why that national piece from a participation point was really important. That's
exactly right. And look, the interesting thing about participation, we in the Australian market of 24, maybe 25 million people now, we have in Sydney with a market of 5 million people, more professional sporting clubs than are the whole of California.
Yep.
And California's got a bigger GDP and 38 million people.
Yep.
Right? So we are incredibly overcrowded with professional sports, and we expect to win.
Yep.
With 25 million people. So yes, participation programs are fundamentally about getting kids to play and finding talent. But what they're really about is getting kids healthy and living healthy lifestyles. But for a sport, it's about building an affinity to the sport that will last a lifetime.
Yep.
And what we know is that a child who or a person who plays sport at a young age is worth significantly more to a sport over their lifetime than one who doesn't, because they've got a greater propensity to buy tickets, to buy a season ticket or a membership, to buy a shirt. And so, getting kids to play is good business as well as being good for health and good for those sorts of outcomes.
And effectively, like, we're our own case studies, right?
Yep.
You were saying before what you played. I played basketball growing up. I still follow the NBL and the NBA. I played some footy poorly, and I go to the footy. My kids, went and played Oz kick.
Yep.
And I dragged them out in cold mornings, and they played, and that then tied them into coming to the footy and that kind of stuff. It is critical. It gives them a taste, understand the game, and really form that bond with the sport.
That's exactly right. And, Australian sports have probably been tuned into that now for the best part of 10 years.
Yep.
What we're seeing in other parts of the world is that the light's only just starting to go on. And part of that is because of the disruption of other revenue sources that we're starting to see.
Yep.
If you're in the EPL or if you're in the NFL, you've been pretty comfortable relying on television rights revenue to undermine you to underwrite and underpin your business. Hopefully not to undermine. For a very long period of time. So the need to innovate just hasn't been there, or to find new revenue streams. Now, I would never want to be critical of either of those two sports or either of those two countries for not being innovative. But nonetheless, what we are seeing though, and we've started to see it over the last 12 months, the MLB commissioner made a comment late last year about the future of MLB being through participation. And the future of MLB fandom being through participation. We're starting to see in those markets the light going on that not only do you need to grow your fan base through participation, but it makes good business sense.
Yeah. And then, we'll talk about your role at the FFA, and you play in the space of that media rights, the media rights puzzle. And, talking to Hutchie recently around media rights, like all sports rights holders want the rights to keep going up. Yep. You know, they've been courting the Facebooks, the YouTubes, the Amazons to say, you know, come to the party, keep these guys honest. And there's a little bit of standoff. You know, we've had Peter Hutton from Facebook say, no, I don't think we're going to pay for these rights. So there is a little bit of nervousness in the market of who's going to pay, are they going to pay? And so, yeah, from a future point of view, you want to mitigate that risk to say what else is the opportunity. So, you know, your last role, the role you just finished up, has been 6 years at the FFA, all things football here in Australia, Socceroos and A-League. What was... And I joke that you were the collector of titles as your role went along, and it wasn't Game of Thrones styles. We weren't knifing guys. It was just a combination of people moving on, and then just chucking that in, put that on Luke's desk. You must have the longest business card in Australia.
I was clearly doing a good job, Sean.
Yeah, no, obviously.
I started off running the commercial business and ended up running essentially everything that was fan facing. You know, obviously the operation of our league was separate, and it's kind of easy to say what I didn't do. And our national teams, but you know, sort of all of the fan facing digital content development, marketing, broadcast, licensing, consumer products, commercial, all of those things. I had responsibility for. It's interesting. If I can just go back 1 second, just on the rights piece. One of the things that kind of rings true to me is this. You know, NFL is incredibly important to NBC.
Correct. Yep.
And if NBC loses NFL, their share price is going to take a hit.
Yep.
If Amazon loses NFL, I suspect that you won't even see a blip.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest concern. I mean, I think we're all watching and sort of with bated breath what the next cycle of sports rights looks like. But one thing we know for sure, the days of sports being all powerful in their relationship with the media companies is over, and that is incredibly frightening.
Yep. But the opposite of that is put yourself in the shoes, like you said, of the TV executive.
Yes.
Right? That has underpinned their programming for the year with NFL or NBA or AFL or Premier League, you know, either for viewers or audience or subscribers. Like, that's a really big hole to fill.
It is.
And so that you know, that's where I think there is, you know, if Bill Simmons is listening, you know, create that 30 for 30 and get cameras in those rooms to find out what that toing and froing is going to be. Because that's going to be fascinating, because you're right. At NBC goes, what makes people tune into our network? That, you know, that's where live sports still is premium. But how premium it is and the fragmentation of where people are watching and the sophistication of the audience.
Yep.
Like, you know, Amazon did a great job with the EPL and getting subscribers, but the audience and the advertisers are still going, well, how does this work? But like, Amazon got what it wanted. It wanted people signing up for Prime. So
yeah. Look, I think that's right. I think, you know, the changing viewing habits of the population, particularly the younger population, but the population in general, you know, means that there's less long form sport being watched, live long-form sport. There's lots more clips, but there's an enormous opportunity in non-live content.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see, you know, Amazon and Netflix in particular invest in that content. You know, the Formula One series last year, Drive to Survive, I think, from memory. You know, those sorts of programs, Sunderland Till I Die. You know, we're starting to see more of that, and I think that's an opportunity for all sports, let alone broadcasters. Football Federation Australia. Yeah. Well, I 6 years at the FFA. 6 great years.
Like, it's a bit of a common theme, but it seems to be like your stints are about 6 years. Is that
probably long enough for an executive, I reckon?
It's just long enough. Like, you get to tackle some big chunks of work, and it is just a...
Yeah, I think so. Look, you know, I mean, if you look at corporate life, executives tend to last, you know, 5 to 6 years, and in marketing, often shorter periods.
Yeah.
So, you know, I didn't set it out for it to be 6 years, but that's kind of, you know, it was the right time for me. And to be frank, I think probably the right time for the sport. You know, you need fresh ideas and fresh blood at different occasions. Football, look, what a great sport, you know, what a great game. I was privileged to spend 6 years at the sport. It was, in this country, it continues to grow, but its growth is challenged. It's you know, it's incredibly challenging. Football is a code that its fans believe should be the number one code in Australia, because it is pretty much everywhere else.
No,
And
I mean,
they're immensely frustrated that it's not.
Yeah, I mean, I've been lucky enough to work with FFA and across what's happening in the A-League and with the national teams. And, if you're able to take the fandom of the football fans in Australia, and it is a global thing, they are super passionate.
Absolutely.
And so, there's no fault there. And they're, again, the super belief, like it is something unique in this part of the world, the code wars. Right, all these football codes, they all call themselves football, and they fight for that word with such passion. But so then the challenge, at football, was it similar to when you came into cricket? Was there some of that fragmentation and some of those programs that was a similar landscape, or how was it different?
Look, it is similar. The challenges are similar. There are, from a participation point of view, there's clearly a drive for more. It's clearly the number one most participated sport in the country, but there's a drive not just to have more fans, but to actually as participants, but to actually give them a better experience.
Yep.
And probably one of the things I did enjoy in football was the focus was less about acquisition, it was still important, but it was more about experience enhancement.
Yep.
If you enhance the experience, they have a great experience, they keep playing, your numbers grow because you're not churning people out. But from a professional league and national teams point of view, again, a time of enormous change. The A-League was 8 years old when I started.
Yep.
The A-League is an interesting beast, it's fair to say. It's certainly the biggest league in the country that's fully privately owned. And in that private ownership group, of the 10 clubs, is now 11, but the 10 clubs that have been around for the best part of the last 10 years, 8 of them are owned by foreign entities. One of them is owned by a foreign government. Yep. And that creates its own complexity. There's an Indonesian-owned club, there's a Chinese-owned club, there's an English club. So, there's some interesting cultural challenges around.
And it's completely unique in Australia because, for the people who are listening not in Australia, most clubs are member-owned.
Correct.
They're and, they don't have private ownership where, if you're talking to the US or the European market, they're most in this private space. So it does make the A-League a very much a unique entity in the Australian sporting landscape.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think the other interesting challenge, we spoke a little bit earlier about the Big Bash and the Big Bash and the Australian Open being very focused on being entertainment experiences that just happen to have sport going on. Now, there's an acceptance amongst some people within the A-League and football that football's in the business of entertainment.
Yep.
But there's still a hell of a lot of people who are of the view that football's in the business of football.
Yeah.
And of course, the challenge there is if you're in the business of football, then anything that gets in the way of football or that is around it is superfluous.
Yeah.
And when you talk about rusted on football fans, they talk a lot about authenticity.
Yeah.
And so you can't be authentic if you're not doing exactly what's happening in England or in the Serie A or the Bundesliga. And clearly those markets are very different to ours. So there's a bit of an identity crisis within football, Australian football, around what it wants to be and what it needs to be to succeed.
Yeah, and it is. Yeah, and that is the challenge because you've got that rusted on football fans, and then lucky enough to work with the Socceroos, the Matildas when they've had success, whether it be in the Asian Cup and in World Cups and that kind of thing. When the whole of Australia effectively gets around both of those teams, they're two of the most popular teams in Australia, but not many of those fans would identify themselves as football fans. They would be most likely calling it soccer.
Sure.
And they wouldn't actually, know the game that intimately, would be tuning in on this, there's a highlight clip.
Yeah.
They're probably still asking for Tim Cahill to be subbed into the match, like that kind of thing. And it's really hard to get the messaging right to embrace them, and they do want that entertainment product and, the colour that they're getting at Big Bash and what the NBL's doing really well in this space.
Yep, that's exactly right.
That's the tough bit because you've got these two audiences that are almost against one another in some instances.
That's exactly right, and you only have to go onto social media to see that because that passionate football person who wants authenticity is almost insulted.
Yeah.
When you do something that doesn't talk to them in the way they want to be spoken to, and that is incredibly challenging. It's there's no doubt about it, and it's one of the things that we haven't solved.
Yeah.
We got better at. But there was always I always had the feeling at times we were sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards. But look, the game. Let's be frank. The game 15 years ago was insolvent. There was no national league. The Socceroos hadn't been to a World Cup for 24 years, and the Matildas had a couple of years earlier had to do a nude calendar to get exposure.
Yeah.
We now have the A-League 15 years in, 1.8 million people coming through the gate each year. Plenty of upside to that. Plenty of challenges, but nonetheless, we've got a fantastic women's league. We've got Australian women playing in the US, and
arguably
Japan.
one of the best in the world, in Sam Kerr. Playing over
the
in
face
England
of Nike. Women's football. The Matildas, are in the top 5 in the world. We're hopefully going to host a Women's World Cup in 2023 if FIFA makes the right decision.
Yep.
And they're the most loved national sporting team, and the Socceroos the most loved men's national sporting team. So a lot's been achieved, but there's a long way to go too.
And where do you think the future is for football and I guess for sport overall in seeing some of these themes that you've seen over the different destinations you've been? Yeah,
look, I think, from an A-League perspective, I think the future of the A-League isn't bringing in, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, as good as it would be to see him running around. It's actually developing young talent and, getting exciting young talent onto the pitch and developing them to go overseas and hopefully come back. And I think, it's interesting to watch MLS. That's the model that MLS have evolved to. They're still doing some things with the Zlatans of the world. But and I think that's absolutely what the A-League needs to be and build its identity around that. And the Where Heroes Are Made campaign of the last 2 years has really been us trying to start the position for that. But of course, the clubs have to buy into that. And I think they are. I think, what we're seeing from the new administration behind the A-League is a desire to go down that path. And I think if we do that, football fans in Australia will still follow Chelsea and they'll still follow Man U and all the other European and teams around the world, but they'll have a passion for a local team. And that's the opportunity. There's 7.8 million football fans in this country and or people that identify as football fans. Yep. What the A-League needs to do is not necessarily convert rugby league fans or AFL fans. Yep. It just needs to switch on more of those 7.8 million.
Yeah, you're a football fan and you're right. You're watching, you've now got access to all of this global game that you didn't have 10, 15 years ago. So, yes, you can consume all this content and you can be up at 2 a.m. in the morning to watch the EPL, but the only way to see live football is to go to an A-League game. And, that's the piece that if they can unlock that, super important. So you finished up at FFA. What's next? What's the next chapter as we turn over the page?
Yeah, well, interestingly, we've touched on a few of the themes. So I've started a business called Alecria, which is a Latin word that means active. Okay. And I'll spell that just so that everybody's clear. It's ALACRIA.
Yep.
Alecria.com. AlecriaGlobal.com actually.
Yeah.
And that is a business that's really focused around experience. It's about creating enhanced experience, whether that be for participants, whether that be in stadia, and building fan engagement and fan connection to businesses, to sports, in the case of fans, customers, in the case of other businesses, to really build lifetime value. Yep. So, what we want to do is, in the case of sport, we're talking about, we're on the Sports Geek podcast.
Yes.
We are helping sports build the products that attract fans, that attract participants at a young age, and then working with those sports using data and technology to retain those participants and turn them into fans and then maximise their value over their lifetime. And that's a really commercial and kind of financial comment, right? But what we want to do is curate their experience. We want to make sure that we're using the opportunities that are available to us, particularly around data, to make the right offers to participants and their families at the right times, to get them into games, to get them to watch, to get them to buy a shirt, and really build that connection.
So to take that lifetime journey of a fan of 5, 6, 7-year-old. How do they get introduced? What does that experience look like?
That's exactly
what do they get in their hand that locks them in either to the sport or a club or the league, but they're not stopping there. Like, 'cause that's
right.
where where they fall off. Like, oh, they've done that and they've stopped, or they've done this and that's the experience piece of.
Correct.
Like, the technology now exists to be able to connect those dots a little bit.
That's exactly right. So we spoke earlier about the fact that participation programs are great because they have health outcomes, and that's really important and clearly a big focus. And the US government have recently, or late last year, released a strategy around getting more kids active because, amazingly, junior participation in sport in the US is declining.
Yep.
which is, an amazing situation. So that we want to do that. But what we know is that fans, that sports drive 75% of their revenue from fans who have participated in their sport at some point.
Yep.
So clearly there's an opportunity for sport to grow their revenue base by getting that participation piece correct and then locking those participants in and building their lifetime connection to the sport and the franchise.
So how do you go about selling that to either a high level CEO, especially because you're looking at the NSO or a league that's saying this is such a long play, right? When the last 5 to 10 years they're like, let's chase down all these digital fans and let's, cheeks in the seats, let's get them to a game.
Yep.
But if they've never played, and you still want to do that, you want to bring in new markets and introduce them to your game, but how tough it is, like the marketing spend and the effort you have to do to come and check out our game when if you can get this kid at 5 or 6,
yep.
At 15, 16, 17, they've already got the scarf, they've already ingrained in a team, it's part of their psyche that, I've just got to go.
Yeah. Look, it's interesting you ask how do you sell it, and clearly there is a sell, but what we're seeing is that the sophistication around sport and sports management has grown enormously in the last 10 years, and the 10 beyond before that as well, I guess. We're seeing that sports, the light is going on, that the low-hanging fruit, the easy wins, in terms of new revenue and growing revenue, they've already been done.
Yep.
We're also seeing a dynamic where young people growing up are not just looking at sport from an entertainment engagement point of view, but they're on social media and they're on Netflix and they're on Disney Plus, and they've just got so many offers, and so many different things to do. So sports have worked out, sometimes through pain, that the old ways of doing things, which is basically hang your flag up and wait for the kids to come, it just doesn't. It's just not going to happen. And so they know that they need to be more sophisticated. They also know that data is an opportunity, but very few sports and very few clubs that we speak to really know how to use that and make that really work for them. So, we talk to them about the opportunity. We talk to them about how we can generate revenue for them out of this, but we also make it quite plain that, yes, there's a long lead time on this, but if you don't start now, you're going to be left behind.
Yeah, it is. Sorry, we can fix it here because we can't get a time machine in 5 years, 10 years' time when you say, where did that generation go?
Correct.
And I think there is an opportunity, I have spoken before on the podcast, especially Melbourne being such a unique sports city, and Sydney, a close second. Sorry to my Sydney friends, but Melbourne is going to be better. But it is such a sports intensive market, and for the population and the amount of kids that are playing, the amount of people that are playing, all the support networks for club basketball and club cricket and football clubs, we have got a really active nation, and it's actually something that Australians can, export to the world to say, well, this is how we do sport. This is how we make those connections. I think it's a really good story that I think has already started from a club membership point of view. We're seeing, US teams and that sort of pick up those monikers and calling them members rather than season ticket holders and that kind of thing. I think, that's where I think there is an opportunity for Australia to sort of lead the way in this is what participation looks like. Haven't solved it. Haven't said here's the exact, solution.
That's right.
But we're a long way down that path.
Yeah, look, that's exactly right. And, as I said earlier, those bigger markets haven't had to innovate in this space as much. But clearly, and I'll use the US as an example again, the Trump administration have, released this strategy around getting more kids active.
Yep.
It's the first time that's come out. It's a really significant step. And now they're getting behind it. But at the same time as that happening, and again, they're addressing declining rates of junior participation, which in a country that has a significant obesity epidemic just as we do, that's really concerning. But at the same time, you've got the franchises who historically haven't played in this space. They've left it to either the leagues or in the case of MLS, they've left it to US soccer. They've started to work out that participation is good for their business. It's a recurring theme. I think I've said it a few times now.
It is.
And so that's incredibly an incredible opportunity for US sport. I think it's an incredible opportunity for Alacrea as well to help them as they go on the journey of starting to play an active role in driving participation with the positive health outcomes that come from that and the positive business outcomes.
Yeah, because it's fine and well for a government or a president to say this is what we want to do.
Yes.
But then it becomes a little bit of it's like that Spider-Man meme where everyone's pointing to one another. Schools are saying, oh, no, you do it. And grassroots or sports orgs are saying you do it. And it has the problem. That's why the problem hasn't been tackled, because
Correct.
Everyone's been pointing at someone else. And so the opportunity exists for either the organising body, whether it might be like a US Soccer or an LA Galaxy or a club, to say, well, we want to take it on board, because the fans and the participants, the players in this case, are crying out for it.
That's exactly right.
Whether it's access to facilities, access to coaching, way to get active,
and that's the other element of this, and why it's important that we get active engagement from the franchises. Clearly, the franchises in the US instance, in the UK, are incredibly wealthy. Some are in Australia as well, but it's a slightly different model. But one of the problems in the US is that the participation for a lot of parents is not about the kid coming out having a fun social experience, which is the key driver for junior participation in this market. It's about professionalism. Yep. It's about them being the next pro player, and it might be them playing in a travel league. It might be them paying to play and be trained in a professional, training base. And there are some amazing facilities that are being built in the US. But for every kid who's got a parent who can afford to hire a professional coach and put them through a professional facility, there are 100 kids whose parents can't, and there's nothing being provided for them.
Yep.
And that is the reason why we're seeing a decline in participation, or one of the main reasons we're seeing that decline in the US market, because there isn't the service being provided for the poor kids or the kids that don't have the ability to pay to play. And so they don't play sport. And that's a real problem.
And is that where, I guess, the commercial lens sort of comes to it, with more partners and brands wanting to look at corporate social responsibility and want to give back, and not just, we just want to put logos on the side of that stadium and everyone will be warm and fuzzy. Whereas if they can say, well, we're actually putting helping these kids through, and it's a different sponsorship bucket when you're talking to those brands. They're not looking for the awareness piece. They're like, this is what we can do. Is that part of, because you roll out these programs, it's like someone's got to pay.
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly right. We see in this market, NAB, a big bank, one of the big four banks in Australia, has been a long-term partner of Australian Football League's junior program, and that's been incredibly good for their business. But they have been an active promoter of that program, running their own television campaigns and so forth, which has been really positive. Woolworths, big supermarket in Australia now, you can't walk into a Woolworths store anywhere around the country without seeing promotion of their cricket program, which they now sponsor. So, we see that in Australia. We're starting to see that turn on in the US. Early days. It's been a bit more, the British model's a little bit more like the Australian model. So we've seen, that has existed in the UK a bit more. But the UK have only in the last 3 or 4 years, things like Star Cricket have only really started to turn on the Australian model of junior participation programs. And cricket's a great example. They're seeing enormous growth in their programs and in their junior participation. I think they're now 3 or 4 years into that program. Interestingly, it was an Australian who went over and set that up for them. But so the export of the knowledge in this country is definitely an opportunity.
Terrific. So before we get into the closing five,
yes,
how can people find you on the internet? Where's the best place?
So we're across all the major social platforms, but Alacria Global, so ALACRIA Global.com. We're on LinkedIn, Alacria. We're on Twitter and Facebook and Insta.
And what's the best way to find you? What's the best platform that people would be able to connect with you, Luke?
Yes. Well, I tend to be on Twitter. I have found that Twitter is becoming more and more clogged with trolls.
This is the case. Yep.
But it does tend to be my go-to. But Twitter, I do a bit on LinkedIn these days. I enjoy the LinkedIn platform. I think that's becoming, certainly in terms of the industry, more and more insightful. The comments and the articles that are being written and being shared. So LinkedIn, and everyone's on Insta, aren't they?
Everyone is. Yeah. So. Do you remember, you would have been to a few sports events in your time. Do you remember the first sports event you ever attended?
Yeah, I was listening to your podcast with Hutchie the other day, and I'm going to answer in a really similar fashion. So, the first sporting event I remember going to was an AFL football game at a place called Waverley Park.
Okay.
which was a concrete bowl.
Arctic Park, as it was sometimes
exactly right.
known. Did you get bogged in the car park trying to get out?
I've had a number of bad experiences in that place. They bulldozed it in the end, and that was the right outcome.
Yep.
But it was a game between Fitzroy, who no longer exist,
Yep.
and my team, North Melbourne. My mother was a Fitzroy fan, and I was a North Melbourne fan, and I remember it for many reasons, not the least of which because Fitzroy won,
Yep.
which was devastating at the time. But
Okay.
that's my first sporting memory.
Terrific. And obviously you would have been to many sporting events. Do you have a favourite sports food memory, or do you have a go-to food when you're at an event?
I've got a favourite sports food memory, and
Yeah.
I've got a go-to.
Yeah.
My favourite sports food memory is at Wrigley Field,
Okay.
Chicago hot dog.
Yep.
I mean, just an amazing experience, an amazing place. So, I have vivid memories of that and enjoy that. But I too am a party pie kind of guy.
Okay.
Yep. And to the extent that I can rate the party pies around the country by stadia,
Yep.
around Australia anyway. And I'm rather offended if they don't come out.
Yeah. You're like, it's
Which is not great for my waistline.
Three-quarter time, and you're like, hang on, guys, where are the party pies?
That's exactly
Yeah,
right. It's a very Australian thing, but it doesn't help my waistline. But I'm a sucker for a party pie.
That's all right. What's the first app you open in the morning?
Look, it tends to be Twitter.
Yep.
But I also I scroll the newspapers.
Yep.
Sports section first, and not just Australian papers, but New York Times, LA Times. The British papers tend to stay away from the tabloids. But
Yep.
I'm an avid scroller of news first thing in the morning.
Terrific. Is there someone that you follow or listen to or read that you suggest that the Sports Geek podcast listeners should?
Other than you, Sean.
It's a setup. That's the only reason I asked this question. No. Who else other than me?
I always enjoy Darren Revell's stuff on LinkedIn. But there's a lot. Look, certainly I always find the things that he shares interesting, but there's a lot. But he's probably the guy that stands out for this conversation.
Terrific. And what social media platform is your MVP? You might have spoiled this one already, but what's your go-to if you were to have to pick them out of a lineup and only keep one? Which one is it?
Well, for quality content, at the moment it's LinkedIn.
Yeah.
For just general entertainment,
Yeah.
it's actually Twitter. And I must admit, at times I have been guilty of throwing some burley in the water and letting and I shouldn't do that, but letting the trolls bite. But they're probably the two.
Yeah. I really do. Yeah. I think it is common. Like someone asked me the other day, what's the best way to connect with people in the sports business industry? And I'm like, 6-7 years ago, I would have just said Twitter because we're all on there. We're having a conversation like we're in a bar. But there's just so much volume there now that it gets lost. And I think more and more people are stepping back and consuming and conversing less. But they've obviously done the tweaks to the algorithm on LinkedIn where you're seeing more relevant content and that kind of stuff and conversation happening. So
it's a shame. Look, I really enjoy having a sensible and intelligent conversation on Twitter with people, and it still happens. And I particularly when I was at the FFA tried to answer as many questions as I possibly could, as long as they were asked in a sensible and polite manner. But your ability to do that has become less and less, whereas LinkedIn, I haven't had that problem yet, and hopefully I won't.
Well, terrific. Thank you very much for coming on the podcast. Enjoy your day at the tennis. I think you're going to the tennis now. Ala Correa. We'll have all the links in the show notes for this podcast, but thanks for coming on the podcast and talk to you soon.
Thanks, Sean. It's great to be a part of it, and congratulations on everything you're doing with Sports Geek.
New workshops on audience, content, distribution, valuation, and pitch following Sports Geek's Digital to Dollars process. Go to digitaltodollars.com.
Thanks again to Luke Bould. You can connect with him, as he said, on LinkedIn. I'll send him a tweet, LD Bould, BOULD on Twitter. You can find the links to everything about Luke and how to connect with him at sportsgeekhq.com/266. And you can also check out Ala Correa at alacorreaglobal.com. ALACRI is how you spell Ala Correa. And you also, if you want to go back in the archives and listen to one of Luke's partners in the Ella Career business, Dino, Dippy and Medico, you can do that by going back to episode 255. Dino discusses similar themes around grassroots sports and how you can facilitate it, and the importance of implementing good programs around that, and with the work that he's done with DMC Sport. So if you've missed that episode 255, I think recorded late last year, you can go back into the archives and look for episode 255. sportsgeekhq.com/255. If you've missed it, you can probably just refresh your feed in the podcast app of your choice to see that episode. Before I wrap up this episode, something that we are doing a little bit of at the minute is athlete digital training. As the winter seasons in this part of the world approach, there is that need to give your players a refresher on what is the latest and on all things social and digital, and how should they be performing, how do they handle some of the issues that come with being a professional athlete in a social and digital world, but then also how can they best maximise their brand from a growth, fan engagement point of view, and best engage with you and your team and their sponsors. So if you're interested in that, we're running an offer at the moment for the first 10 training clients for 2020 to be able to have 2 of these athlete workshops for one. So if you want to do it with your men's team and your women's team, or your senior squad and your junior squad, or even if you want to do it with your playing group and your coaching group, there's plenty of ways for it to be mixed around. But it's a really good way, and one of the outcomes we normally find of it is a lot more player ownership of behaviour and expectations on what they're doing on digital. So we've actually had, leading players stand up, and the captain sort of starting to set some of the rules, especially for some of the young guys, on when they should be posting, when they shouldn't be posting, what's acceptable from the playing group. So if you're interested in those kind of things, please reach out. You can find out more at sportsgeekhq.com. Follow the prompts to athlete training. But as I said, if you reach out now, there's a special offer for a 2-for-1. With that training can be held in person. Done it in locker rooms and playing sheds and the like, but also done it online if you've got a squad that's spread out around the world. And national squads are common like that. Can do it online as well. And then another piece that we're doing, I spoke about it last week. Just to give some feedback, the Football West Digital Education Program we're doing with their clubs. Helping the grassroots clubs better understand what they can do in the digital space, and applying some of the techniques and tactics that we've done with pro sports on what they can do in the grassroots level. So we had the first session that I recorded last week and did it with a bunch of clubs online around understanding digital audiences, which was very much around the digital dollars know your audience pillar. So dove into some of the data that Facebook has on their fans and how they can recruit more fans, or how they can recruit more players, how they can start presenting that audience to their partners. So we've got that as a weekly session at the moment with Football West clubs. Expect to have more clubs sort of sign up on a weekly basis as the word of mouth grows. This week we're going to be looking at how a grassroots club with limited resources can develop a content plan and where they should be putting their efforts. It's great to be replicating what the pros are doing, but you can't exactly do that if you are just a grassroots club with light on resources. So we'll be showing them how to stretch those resources as far as they possibly can in a volunteer sense to get the biggest impact of what they're trying to do. So if you're interested in a program like that for your, it might be for your league or for your association, it's all online. So there's no travel costs. I don't have to say, here's my request for flights and hotels and things like that. It's all recorded. It's all online. It allows everyone to dial in from multiple places. So please reach out, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com. I'm really looking forward to running this program, both finishing it off with the guys at Football West in WA, but also running it in different parts of both Australia and the world, because I really do think it will help lift the game of grassroots sports. And then the last thing is, I guess, a little bit of an esports update. We've kicked off year 2. Gravitas is now entering its second year in the OPL. Gravitas, for those who have not tuned in before, Gravitas is our League of Legends team. They play in the Oceanic Pro League here in Australia, one of 8 teams, and our season kicked off last Friday, end of January. So we play Friday nights and Saturday nights. So I guess a bit of a recap from last year. Last year I learned a lot about esports. Effectively been telling people I've like to think, and I've got my esports MBA, sort of understanding the ins and outs on where esports is very unique and very different to the world of sports, but then also seeing some of that overlap and some of the same issues that we have either seen, solved, and faced and solved in the world of sports, or are facing the same problems. So that was, I guess, some of my findings, I guess, of the first year. From a percentage split, it's one of the common questions I get is, how do I split my time between running an esports team and an esports business, and running Sports Geek as a consulting business, and keeping the content flowing out like the podcast and the newsletter. I'll put my hand up. I put a lot of time into Gravitas in 2019. Effectively starting a team from scratch is, to be honest, it's bloody hard work. I was lucky enough to have a team of people. My CEO, Fawn Crabtree, Brandon Defina, who was our GM last year, who helped do a lot of that heavy lifting. But there was a lot of time spent on the esports business last year. The good thing is now there is a foundation. We're not doing everything for the first time, so I'm able to better appropriately assign my time. So I'll be able to have more time to work on Sports Geek business, work with Sports Geek clients, work on consulting initiatives for them and projects and things like the education programs and sponsorship efforts that we're working on the Sports Geek side. So I think it'll be a bit more equitable. Because we've got the operations now up and running. What are we going to do differently in year 2? We have moved from Melbourne to Sydney, so we're going to have a Sydney base for our League of Legends team, primarily a cost consideration, rather than housing and flying a team up for 20 times. It makes much more sense and much more cost effective to have the team based in Sydney. Additionally, our roster makeup is vastly different. Last year we ran with five guys. League of Legends is a 5-man team, a 5-man roster, and those 5 guys played the whole season. Because we went with a different roster strategy, and we went with players that potentially are studying or working part-time, we needed a wider roster. We wanted to see some grassroots development, so we actually signed 3 players from our community partnership with Sumner Society. So we see there's a real opportunity in developing the next generation of esports athletes in the League of Legends space. So we've got a roster of 7, which gives us a bit more flexibility for practice schedules and availability, with the knowledge that we expect some of the guys to be at work from 9 to 5 or studying and those kind of things. So we just need that flexibility, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how they go and develop, and giving them all some stage time in the OPL. And one of the main focuses, I guess, from the business side of esports that will be mine is around 2 things: audience growth. How do we get more people watching the broadcast and watching our games, both online and in real life? And then the second piece is commercial revenue. How do I help brands engage esports overall, but especially OPL, and considering that's where we are. And this part of the work is really overlapping with Sports Geek. So this is the ideal point where one of the reasons I got into the space is, where is the piece of work that does overlap sports and esports, and this is definitely it. As we're seeing sports in itself trying to figure out how to commercialize streaming. I did speak a lot about streaming and OTT in the last Sports Geek Q&A episode. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap in esports and sports. As more streaming content comes online, more and more people are trying to figure out how do we best commercialize it. So it's good to see some of those synergies around the work that I'm doing in the Sports Geek space and esports space. So hopefully those two run in parallel, and we can have success on both sides. From a Gravitas point of view and from a team point of view, we'll be definitely pushing the edges, pushing the boundaries around some membership and merchandise initiatives. If you listen to my chat with Adam Hyman from Sportility, they're our merchandise and partner, and are able to help us fulfill membership we'll definitely be pushing the limits and pushing the edge cases for Adam on how we can do it. So if you are, and then the next thing is, looking into other titles. So we're now seriously looking into other titles where Gravitas could be represented, and seeing how those business models work, because that's the unique part of esports. I think every title has a different business model, whereas in the world of sports, most sports run the same business model, right? They get their TV rights, they get their sponsorship, they sell their tickets. It doesn't matter what sport it is, it's relatively the same. Whereas in esports, where the money comes from and how people are paid and the flow of money and what it is around different titles is really different from title to title. So that's been part of the esports MBA. And so this weekend, I recorded the podcast with Luke during the Australian Open. As I'm recording this, I attended the AO Summer Smash this weekend, which is the Fortnite competition that they had at the Australian Open. I spoke to Rob O'Gorman at our Money in Esports event earlier this year. This was year 2. Again, very successful event. Really interested to see the mechanics of the Fortnite competitive scene, and also the very different fan base. Very much a young fan base that are following the Fortnite scene, and very much also the players are much younger than in a title that we're working in League of Legends. So yeah, always interested to learn more, and looking to dip our toe into the space across different titles. So if you're interested in chatting more about esports, now whether that is you're a sports team trying to figure out if you should be getting in, how you should be getting in, how you should be engaging, please give me a call. If you're someone that's interested in getting into esports and investing and saying, I want to be part of this, we are seeking investment from an SG Esports point of view. If it's something you're interested in, and it doesn't matter where you are in the world, because esports, luckily, and one of its upsides is global. So we have been talking to people in different parts of the world about investing into the business and seeing what the opportunity looks like in the Oceanic region, and what the investor price and what it costs to get into the game. So if you're interested from an investment point of view, please reach out. Happy to discuss what we're looking for. Or if you're a sponsor, if you're a brand and you're trying to figure out, hey, how do we get into the space? Is it around engaging a team? Is it around engaging players, a league? What's the media piece look like? That's some of the things that we're currently doing across esports, but then also sports. But we can also help and advise you. If you end up being a sponsor of Gravitas, that's obviously a bonus. But my goal is to bring more brands into the space, because the more brands into the space, then more of that money will potentially flow down to the teams. And the benefit of that is I have a team. So if you're interested in any of that space, or if you just want to scratch that itch of we want to get into this space a little bit further, and understand the esports and gaming world, that's effectively what we've been doing across the Sports Geek and SG Esports businesses. As I said, Gravitas kicked off year 2 this week, and I'm going to bring back sounds of the game. I've only been doing it every now and again, but it was with great pleasure and pride to hear Skimmy and Rusty calling the Gravitas boys taking down the 2019 OPL champions Mammoth in the first week of the OPL this week. Hit that play button, James.
Get the pick, because Mammoth go on them, and Beats is just unkillable on this Renekton, and that works so well for them.
They're going for this one, Rusty. Mid and hips down. Respawn time is at least 5 seconds and onwards. The first tower falls. Now we work on towards the second. They're getting clomped on down. They find Kweku. There's the core. It's dangerously low.
They're
going for it. They're looking for it. The core is falling on down 10% and going. That's GG. Gravitas take the win in 26 minutes.
Closer than they would have liked their Gravitas with ending the game, but they do get it. They get the victory, and it comes through getting the picks in the jungle. Again, you can know the calm, measured expertise of a player like Pralix is able to tell them to slow down, set up in a place, and that's all it took, really. The one remaining OPL player from either of these squads in 2020, and he is the one that gets the victory in the Battle of the Rookies.
You have to wonder if he was that guiding hand to say, look, let's keep calm and composed, because those lanes...
very proud of the Gravitas squad, and it is a squad. As I said before, a wider squad, 7 players, 2 coaches, 4 players and 1 coach getting their first stage win on Saturday night. So I look forward to seeing them grow this year. If you want to follow the story and what we're doing, follow Gravitas across socials. Gravitas GG is the website. Gravitas is our Twitter handle. Gravitas OCE is our Instagram handle. They're pretty much the focuses of what we're trying to do from a social space. You can obviously follow Gravitas on Facebook. We'll be sharing content across all of those channels. And if you want to stay in touch with all things esports, you can sign up at sgesports.com. We have a fortnightly email that will keep you up to date on all things esports. Before I wrap this episode up, don't forget, send in your questions. So if you've got a question on anything from this episode, whether it's a question that you think Luke from Ella Korea hit on around grassroots, or around how you implement grassroots campaigns, potentially something around the media piece that we discussed, or a question around training or athletes, or esports, send them in. sportsgeekhq.com. I would love to answer your questions, and they will be on the Sports Geek Q&A episodes. Every week I answer 3 questions that come in via the internet, and give you my opinion on those topics. So go to sportsgeekhq.questions, and remember, if you like this content, if you find it valuable, you can support it at Patreon, sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. Until next episode, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Join Sports Geek Nation access to exclusive Slack and Facebook groups with regular Q&A sessions with Sean Callanan. Go to sportsgeeknation.com to join. Need help with your digital rate card? Not sure how to price your assets? Is there a disconnect between digital and commercial? That is where Sean works best, in digital divorce counselor mode. Book a time for a call with Sean to discuss the Sports Geek process. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call.
Go to sportsgeekhq.com for more sports digital marketing resources.